So when you're in the concepting process, you're constantly challenging what you think you want to have happen to the logo, and you end up making mistakes and having happy accidents. And this is kind of where I ended up going with it. And the reason why earlier I wasn't able to kind of close that gap is I wasn't thinking, oh, I could put dynamics down there and kind of close that awkward gap that drop down P was making. So I was able to kind of fill that in with the other word. And I also went ahead and I softened all the corners of each letter, and I kind of changed the coloring to a more simple color palette instead of doing kind of the crazy multiple colors, which could look cool, but I was a little worried that it was almost too much. So I changed the colors. Of course, you can change it if the client doesn't want pink. That's a very easy change to make whatever color scheme I think that they would want, depending on what kind of company this is going to be. And so I just wanted to kind of show you how I ended up. And these are the final kind of versions of the logo. And we have this wonderful black and white version, which could be the one that ends up being selected by the client. I love to have simple black and white versions because sometimes when you mess with color too soon, it could confuse the client. Sometimes I like to send black and white concepts to them first, and then we can dive into color afterwards. Because when you send a color version, they'll go, oh, I don't like pink, or we didn't think purple would match our brand. So unless they already have a color palette developed or branding standards, sometimes it's great to go ahead and send them the black and white version. So if you're working with the client on this, they're going to go back and forth with you probably for a couple of different revisions and different tweaks, because you're going to be able to design the logo well, but they're going to have their own idea of what they want in their head. So in this case, this is kind of the logo that I thought would win out because it was bright and vibrant, and I even brought out a little bit of that element of the O in the circular part of the P. I also brought that out in the O so it can stand alone instead of having the P be its separate symbol. But in the end, this is the one that won out. Two different versions. One that can work with the large P, but one that can be totally standalone and does not have to depend on a symbol for the logo to be recognized. So I think this was a smart choice on part of the client to get a really well-rounded, adaptable logo. So you can see how we rounded the corners from the original typeface, and I've also added that same rounded effect that goes from dark to transparent on the O as well. So that added a little bit of consistency. So I'm going to just make a few more tweaks, and I think we're ready to be able to bring this to the client for final files. So if they've already approved, I'm just kind of messing with that. I want to make sure that comes down where the D is. And after I've paired it on the grid system and I've been able to kind of get the alignment properly, make sure the S goes all the way to the end of the N, and make sure these are all consistent and look very, very close or very, very ready to go, I'm going to talk about exporting files. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom out of here. These are all of our other versions that we no longer need. I'm going to go ahead and slide all of these away. These are the two final versions they want. I'm going to go ahead and make this larger. And I'm going to go to File, Document Setup. I'm going to set up a couple of artboards. So I'm going to go to Edit Artboards. I'm going to set up a square for my vertical orientation. And I can click on New. This is going to be a new artboard. And this is going to be for my horizontal presentation of the logo. And what's great about setting up multiple artboards is when I export this, I'm exporting both files. I don't have to have a separate Illustrator file for each version. I have just one Illustrator file for the entire logo. I'm going to go ahead and save my file, and then I'm just going to go ahead and export. So we're going to talk about versions. So there's several different versions that the client's going to want and need. And the first one is going to be a vector version, which is the most important because that means if another designer was to ever inherit this brand, they'd be able to have all the anchor points and be able to change it, update it, refresh it, whatever. It's really great to have a vector version. So we're going to go to Save As for a vector version, and we're going to save it two different ways. And I always like to give clients more options because the more the merrier. They don't have to come back to you 3 years from now and go, hey, do you still have this file? They have everything they need. So I'm going to save it as an AI file. I'm just going to click on Save, and for the sake of time, I'm just going to pretend like I clicked on Save. But I'm also going to do an EPS. Both of these are valid vector files. So these are the files you're going to send off to the t-shirt printer, any large format printing like a banner. they're going to really want this nice high resolution vector version. So both of those I like to give to the client. I also like to export. So instead of going to save as, I'm going to export. And this is going to be your PNGs and JPEGs. This is going to be what most of the employees are going to use. And PNG is going to be transparent background. So I'm going to export that. I'm going to use artboards so that it crops it to the artboard. And I'm going to do this at a pretty high PPI, which is resolution. The higher the better, because a lot of people like to use these PNGs and they blow it up to a large size and it looks really bad. So if I go ahead and save it as a high resolution file, they don't have that problem. It's super high resolution. They would really have to make it big to make it blurry. So that's just from experience and working with clients over the years, what they try to do with the files. So that's exporting. I wanted to show you what both of those look like. It's on a transparent background. So that gray indicates that it can be put on any background at some case. Okay, so export. So I did a PNG, but now I'm going to do my final one, which is JPEG. I'm going to do the same. This is going to be for the web, for social media. So I'm going to do a resolution of 150, but you could do 300 because most social media websites, they'll size down for you. So better to give them a higher resolution. They can always size down than having too small and them not being able to size up. So just to kind of go over the different file formats that I'm sending my client, I'm sending them the .ai file, which is the Illustrator file. And also I made sure I outlined the type. So when you have any live editable text, unless they have the font installed, which you can always send them a file of the font, so the typeface, so Railway, you would send that to them. Or you can click on any live text and right click and create outlines. So it's going to create outlines. I can't edit it anymore, but I can go and manipulate the anchor points. We want that when we export our files, because if they don't have that font installed and they try to open up this file, it's going to substitute another font. So right clicking, and sometimes what I'll do is I'll select all and then I'll create outlines. So you can right click, go to type, create outlines, or you can just right click. This is what I do, and then create outlines. So once you do that, you can go ahead and export those files and all the type is outlined. You don't have to worry about live text and them not having that type installed. So there's all the different file formats. I had the two vectors, the EPS, the .ai. I also have the PNGs and the JPEGs. And that's pretty much it. I package that together in a zip file and I send it off the printer, and then I send them my final invoice, which is of course my favorite part. So just when you think you're done with their logo, there's always just one more thing to do. So we sent them all the versions that are gray. That goes great on light backgrounds. But what if they wanted to apply their logo to a dark background? We definitely want to give them that ability. With every single logo we do, our logo should be able to go on a darker background. So we're going to go ahead and take our logo real quick, and we're going to go ahead and take this and convert it to white. So I'm just going to select some of these elements. I'm going to ungroup everything so I'll be able to have access to all these little pieces. Ungroup. And I'm going to go ahead and change them all to white. Okay, so we want to do that white, or we could do a light gray, but I'm just going to do a white. Actually, a light gray might look a little better. Let's do a little bit of a light gray that looks really great on the purple. So now we're going to go back. We have three little places where we have the swirl, so we want to make sure all those are the same. I'm going to go ahead and click on gradient and see if it'll let me change both of them at the same time, but probably not. So we're going to go ahead and zoom in on the first one and do these one at a time to make sure these have a better contrast than what they have right now. Okay, so I clicked on gradient, and let's see if we can't make that a little bit of a darker contrast. The double click. We don't want it too much of a dark contrast, so maybe right there. We definitely, that's part of the branding, is that little swirl. So we want to make sure that's a little bit darker. So I'm just going to go through each one of these, make sure it's the same color. Okay, and I think I have one more up top. This one's very light. So we're going to go ahead and get our gradient going. Let's go ahead, and I think this was a linear gradient, so I'm just going to make that darker. And there we go. We have this adapted to a white background. That's too dark, so I'm going to make that much, much lighter. So now this works well.